The rain had followed the carriage the whole way from Bath, as though it meant to punish the Hallowell family for daring to hope. Iris Hallowell pressed her gloved hand against the fogged window and watched the great iron gates of Rothmere Park rise out of the mist like the ribs of some sleeping giant. She was cold, she was tired, and she was, as always, the one nobody had thought to ask whether she wanted to come. "Sit up straight, Iris. You slouch like a governess," said her mother, not unkindly, but not kindly either, the tone of a woman for whom kindness was a currency spent only on the daughter who could still earn it back tenfold. Mrs. Hallowell's eyes were fixed, as they had been for 3 days of travel, on Seraphina. Seraphina Hallowell did not need to be told to sit straight. She sat as though a portraitist were always one heartbeat away from beginning her likeness, her golden curls undisturbed by the jostling of the road, her cheeks flushed with a becoming pink that Iris privately suspected she had pinched into place an hour ago and refreshed twice since. Seraphina was the beautiful one. It was not unkindness that made people say so, it was simply the truth, stated the way one states the colour of the sky. Iris was the useful one. That was the word her mother used, and she had used it so often that Iris had stopped hearing the insult buried inside it. Useful for keeping the household books when the steward proved slow, useful for writing the letters that begged for extensions on their debts in language delicate enough not to offend the men who held them. Useful, now, for chaperoning Seraphina to Rothmere Park, where the Duke of Rothmere, young, unmarried, and possessed of a fortune large enough to erase every debt her late father had left behind, was said to be searching, at last, for a wife. "You will make yourself scarce once we arrive," her mother said, still watching Seraphina, still smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her elder daughter's sleeve. "The Duke will have no interest in a companion. See that you are useful to the housekeeper and out from underfoot." Iris said nothing. She had learned, over 23 years, that saying nothing cost her far less than saying what she felt. The carriage rocked over a final rut in the drive, and through the rain-streaked glass, Rothmir Hall revealed itself. A vast grey house crowned with 100 dark windows, none of them lit, all of them watching. Iris felt absurdly that the house was assessing her the way her mother did, and finding her wanting before she had even stepped down from the carriage. They arrived a full day before they were expected. Mrs. Hallowell had insisted upon it. Better to arrive early and settle Seraphina's nerves. Better to have the advantage of familiarity before the other invited families descended upon the house for the week's festivities. But their early arrival meant no one had thought to warn the household, and no footman came running with an umbrella, and no housekeeper stood waiting at the door with a curtsy and a warm fire already laid. Instead, the door was answered by a man in plain dark clothes, his hair grey at the temples, his face set in the particular expression of someone who has been interrupted at something more important than answering doors. He did not smile, he did not bow, not properly, merely inclined his head an inch, as though bowing further might cost him something he was unwilling to spend. "You were not expected until tomorrow," he said. His voice was low, rough at the edges, the voice of a man long unused to being questioned. "We are aware of that, Mrs. Hallowell said, sweeping past him into the hall as though he were a piece of furniture she had decided not to acknowledge. Fetch someone to see to our things, and tell the housekeeper Mrs. Hallowell and her daughters have arrived. The man's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. I'll see it done, he said, and something in the flatness of his voice suggested he was accustomed to being spoken to as though he were invisible, and had made his peace with it long ago, in the way one makes peace with an old wound that no longer bleeds, but never fully closes either. Iris, coming last through the door with her own small trunk, because no one had thought to carry it for her, caught the look on his face before he smoothed it away. It was not simply irritation. It was something closer to grief, quickly hidden, the way a man hides a coin he does not wish anyone to see he is short of. She stopped. I am sorry, she said. My mother did not mean to be short with you. We have had a difficult journey, and I am afraid we have descended upon your household without warning, which is no way to arrive anywhere, let alone into someone else's home. She hesitated, then added, because it seemed the only honest thing left to say, it was thoughtless of us. I am sorry for it. The man went very still. It was such a small thing, an apology offered to a servant, the sort of courtesy so rarely extended that he seemed, for a moment, unable to place what to do with it. His grey eyes moved over her face as though searching for the trick in it, the mockery he must have expected to follow. He found none. Iris simply stood there, rain still clinging to her bonnet, waiting to see whether her apology would be accepted or waved away. You need not apologize for your mother's manners, miss, he said finally, and something in his voice had changed, not warmer, precisely, but less guarded. The way a door left ajar is not open, but is no longer fully shut, though I confess I cannot recall the last time anyone did. Then, it was overdue, Iris said, and offered him the smallest of smiles before hurrying after her mother, who had already vanished down the corridor without so much as glancing back to see whether her younger daughter had followed. The man watched her go. He did not know, yet, that she was about to become the most dangerous thing that had happened to his carefully guarded heart in a decade. His name, though no one in the Hallowell family would learn it for some time, was Julian Ashford, Duke of Rothmere, master of the house whose door he had just answered as though he were nothing more than its butler. It had not begun as a lie, exactly. It had begun as an accident of circumstance that he had simply declined to correct. Grimsby, his actual butler, had taken ill a fortnight past and been sent to recover at his sister's cottage in Kent, and Julian, restless, suspicious of the parade of marriageable young women his mother had arranged to descend upon Rothmere Park, and possessed of a bone-deep weariness with being fawned over for his title rather than seen for himself, had decided, on impulse, that he would answer his own door for a few days before the guests arrived. He told himself it was practicality. He told himself the household was understaffed and every hand was needed. He did not tell himself the truth, which was that he wanted, for once in his adult life, to know how people behaved when they believed no one of consequence was watching. He had learned, in the 2 years since his father's death, exactly how little that behaviour resembled kindness. He had learned it first from Lady Constance Aldridge, who had worn his ring for 11 months and left it on his desk, the week she discovered that his father's debts were larger than his father's fortune, taking herself off within the season to marry a viscount with fewer debts and a duller disposition. He had learned it since from every mother who paraded her daughter before him like a horse at Tattersall's, from every daughter who laughed too readily at jokes he had not made, from every letter that arrived addressed not to Julian but to his Grace, as though the man and the title were interchangeable and only the second one mattered. He had grown cranky. He knew. His mother told him so with tiresome regularity. He had grown cold in the particular way that men grow cold when warmth has proven, again and again, to be a currency others accepted only for what it might purchase from him. And then a plain, tired, overlooked young woman in a rain-spotted bonnet had apologized to him. To him, the butler, a man beneath her own family's notice, simply because she believed it was the right thing to do, with no possible advantage to be gained from it. Julian stood in the doorway of his own house for a long moment after the Hallowell carriage had been led round to the stables, turning the small, strange gift of that apology over in his mind the way a man turns over an unfamiliar coin, uncertain yet of its worth, only certain that it did not match any currency he had been given before. He did not correct the misunderstanding that night, when Mrs. Hallowell demanded hot water be brought to her rooms and addressed him as you there without troubling to learn a name. He did not correct it the following morning, when Seraphina Hallowell swept past him in the breakfast room and remarked to her mother, in a voice not troubled by whether he could hear it, that the household staff here seemed shockingly ill, trained for a duke's residence. He told himself each time that the correction could wait, that Grimsby would return within the week, that the deception would end itself naturally, that there was no harm in it. He told himself this because he had not yet admitted, even privately, that he was not maintaining the lie for the household's sake. He was maintaining it because Iris Hallowell, alone among everyone who had crossed his threshold in 2 years, had looked at him and seen a man rather than a title, and he was not yet ready to lose that. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that Iris found, to her private confusion, that she did not dislike. Rothmere Park filled slowly with guests over the coming days. The Pembertons arrived with their daughter Clara, whose ambitions for the Duke's hand were about as subtle as a trumpet fanfare. A pair of aging aunts arrived to gossip and disapprove in equal measure. A young viscount named Whitmore arrived clearly hoping to secure Seraphina's attention before the Duke could secure it himself. The house grew loud with the particular anxious gaiety of people competing for a prize none of them had yet properly seen. For the Duke himself, it was murmured, had not yet made his appearance, and was said to be occupied with business in London until the ball at week's end. Iris, meanwhile, was set to the tasks her mother deemed suitable for a useful daughter, helping the housekeeper reconcile linen inventories, copying out invitations in her careful hand, ensuring Seraphina's gowns were pressed and her ribbons matched her slippers. It was in the course of these small, unregarded duties that she found herself, again and again, crossing paths with the cranky butler who never seemed entirely where a butler ought to be. She found him in the library on her second afternoon, standing before a shelf with a book open in his hands, so absorbed that he did not hear her enter. "I did not take you for a reader," she said before she could stop herself, and then flushed at her own presumption. He closed the book, unhurried, and turned to face her. "Did you take me for something simpler then?" "I took you for a man with very little leisure," Iris said honestly. "Most butlers I have known have not the time to stand about reading Cowper in the middle of the afternoon." "Most butlers," he said, "have not lost someone recently enough that Cowper still makes sense to them." He said it flatly, as though testing whether she would flinch from the admission or press for more, the way most people did once they scented a wound. Iris did neither. "My father died 18 months ago," she said instead, matching his flatness with her own. "I have found that grief makes strange companions of us all. I could not read poetry for a year. Now I cannot read anything else." Something shifted behind his grey eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the particular relief of being met rather than managed. "My father as well," he said. 2 years this spring." "Then we have that in common," Iris said, and offered him a small, rueful smile. "Grief, and an apparent inability to be anywhere we are meant to be at the hour we are meant to be there." "I am precisely where I am meant to be," he said, and something in his voice made the words carry more weight than the sentence alone could hold. Iris did not understand it then. She would understand it later, and it would break her heart to remember how plainly he had told her the truth while she was too unpracticed in hope to hear it. It became, over the following days, a habit neither of them named. She would find him in the orangery, tending to a lemon tree with more care than any butler ought to spend on horticulture, and he would ask after her father in a voice that made it clear he was not merely making conversation. She would find him crossing the garden in the rain without an umbrella, and she would insist he share hers, and he would take it with the particular awkwardness of a man unused to being fussed over, and walk beside her in silence that felt, somehow, louder than speech. He began, without either of them remarking upon it, to appear wherever her duties took her, in the picture gallery while she counted the household silver against an inventory, in the stables while she delivered a message to the coachman, in the small breakfast parlour before the rest of the house had woken, where he brought her tea without being asked and sat with her while she drank it, saying little, watching her with an attention that made her feel, for the first time in longer than she cared to examine, genuinely seen. "You are not at all what your mother believes you to be," he told her once, in the orangery, with the lemon tree's white blossoms scenting the air between them. "And what does my mother believe me to be?" "Useful," he said, and the word, spoken in his low, rough voice, sounded like an accusation against everyone who had ever called her that and meant it as a diminishment. "You are not useful, Miss Hallowell. You are," he stopped himself, and something crossed his face that looked almost like fear, the particular fear of a man who has nearly said too much. "I am what?" Iris asked, her heart beating strangely fast. "Necessary," he said finally, softer than she had ever heard him speak. "There is a difference." Iris did not know what to do with a sentence like that, offered by a servant in an orangery, so she said nothing, and let the silence hold the weight of it, and told herself firmly, walking back to the house afterward, that a butler's kindness meant nothing more than kindness, and that she was a fool to feel her chest ache the way it did. She was not, of course, a fool. She simply did not yet know the truth that would have made sense of everything. The truth came closer to daylight on the fourth day, though neither of them recognized it for what it was. Seraphina, bored of Viscount Whitmore's attentions and restless for grander conquest, had taken to complaining loudly about the household staff at every opportunity, and on this particular afternoon her complaints found their target in the cranky old butler himself, whom she encountered in the corridor outside the picture gallery and addressed with the careless cruelty of a woman who has never once considered that servants might have feelings worth sparing. "You there," she said, snapping her fingers as though summoning a dog. "My slippers were not pressed properly this morning, and I have had quite enough of the shoddy service in this house. I shall speak to the Duke of it the moment he deigns to arrive, and see you turned out for your insolence." Julian's face did not change, but something behind his eyes went very cold, the particular coldness of a man recalling every reason he had ever had to distrust beauty that came without kindness attached to it. "I shall see it corrected, miss," he said, with a bow so precisely, exquisitely correct that it bordered on mockery, though Seraphina was too pleased with herself to notice. She swept past him without a backward glance, nearly colliding with Iris, who had come round the corner in time to hear the whole exchange. "Seraphina," Iris said, low and urgent, "you cannot speak to him so. He is a servant, Iris. I may speak to him however I please." Seraphina's tone carried the particular bafflement of someone genuinely unable to comprehend why the rule she had just stated should require defending. "He is a person," Iris said, and something in her voice, sharper than she usually allowed herself, born of 18 months of being called useful, and a lifetime of watching her sister called beautiful, and never once hearing anyone in her family use the word kind, made Seraphina blink in surprise. "Whatever he is paid to do. He does not deserve to be humiliated for the crime of pressing your slippers imperfectly. I would think you might have learned some compassion, watching how easily the world dismisses those it deems beneath its notice. But I suppose it is easier to overlook cruelty when one has never had to feel the sting of it oneself." Seraphina's mouth opened, closed, opened again, apparently unable to summon an answer to a sister who had never before spoken to her so plainly. She turned on her heel and left without another word, and Iris, breathing hard with the aftermath of her own boldness, turned to find Julian still standing in the corridor, watching her with an expression she could not read. "You did not need to defend me," he said quietly. "I was not defending you," Iris said, though they both knew it was not entirely true. "I was defending the idea that people deserve civility regardless of the size of their fortune. It is a small idea, apparently a rare one, in this house." "It is not rare everywhere," Julian said. "It is rare among people who have never wanted for anything and cannot imagine what it costs to be spoken to as though you are nothing." He paused, and something raw moved across his face before he mastered it. "Thank you," he said. "I do not think anyone has taken my side in a very long time." Iris did not know it, standing in that corridor with the afternoon light slanting gold through the gallery windows, that she had just defended a duke against her own sister's cruelty, believing him a butler the whole while. She would not have believed it if she had been told. And Julian, watching her walk away with her chin still lifted in the aftermath of her small brave stand, understood with a clarity that frightened him that he had fallen in love with a woman who did not yet know his name, and that the longer he let the lie continue, the more he risked losing her the moment it ended. He resolved, that very evening, to tell her the truth before the week was out. He did not get the chance before the truth arrived on its own. It happened in the picture gallery, 3 days before the ball. Iris had gone there alone in the grey hour before dinner, drawn by the quiet and by a portrait she had noticed on her first pass through the room. A young man painted perhaps 5 years earlier, dark-haired, grey-eyed, dressed in the fine dark blue coat of a gentleman rather than the plain clothes of a servant, standing before a window with Rothmir Hall visible behind him. She had thought nothing of it at first. Portraits of gentlemen hung in every great house, ancestors and cousins and connections whose names meant nothing to a visitor. But something in the set of the jaw, the particular grey of the eyes, made her stop and look longer, and feel a strange unease uncoil slowly in her chest. "That is the late Duke's son," said a voice behind her, one of the ageing aunts, Lady Featherstone, come to admire the gallery before dinner, painted the year before his father's death. "Handsome creature, is he not? Though I hear he has grown quite reclusive since." Grief does strange things to a man. She peered more closely at Iris's face. "You look quite pale, my dear. Do you know him?" "No," Iris said, though her voice did not sound entirely like her own. "No, I do not believe I do." But she did. She knew that face, the set of the jaw, the grey of the eyes, the particular quality of restrained sorrow around the mouth, as well as she knew her own reflection, because she had spent 5 days watching it across breakfast tables and orangeries and rain-soaked gardens, believing it belonged to a butler. She stood very still in the gallery for a long time after Lady Featherstone had wandered on, the pieces of the last 5 days rearranging themselves in her mind with the terrible clarity of a puzzle finally solved. The way he spoke of the household as though it were his own to protect, the way the other servants deferred to him in small, unconscious ways she had noticed and dismissed, the way he had said, "I am precisely where I am meant to be," and she had heard nothing but pleasant nonsense, where he had, she now understood, been telling her something enormous. He had let her believe he was nothing. He had let her defend him to her own sister without ever once saying, "You need not. I am the Duke, and it is Seraphina who ought to fear my displeasure, not the reverse." He had let her drink tea with him in the breakfast parlour and share her umbrella and speak to him of her father's death as though they were equals, when the entire time he had held every advantage a man could hold over a woman in her position, and had simply chosen, for reasons she could not yet fathom, not to use it. She did not know whether to feel wonder or fury. In the end, standing alone in the darkening gallery with her father's late-fashioned, dead grey-eyed son watching her from the wall, she felt both at once, and did not know which one would win. She found him that evening in the library, where she had first discovered him reading Cowper, and she did not soften her voice when she spoke. "You are the Duke," she said, without preamble. He set down the book in his hands very slowly and did not deny it. "I am," he said. "How long have you known that I did not know it?" "Since the first evening." "Since you apologized to me at the door for your mother's manners, when no one in 5 years had thought to apologize to me for anything at all." His voice was quiet, careful, the voice of a man walking across ice he is no longer certain will hold him. "I meant to tell you the truth within a day or two, and then each day I did not tell you, I told myself it could wait one more, because I did not want to see how you would look at me once you knew. I did not want to become, in your eyes, what I have become in everyone else's, a title and a fortune and nothing else worth the looking." "You let me defend you to my sister," Iris said, her voice beginning to shake. "You let me believe I was protecting a servant from cruelty he could not answer for himself, when the truth is you could have silenced her with a single sentence, and chose instead to let me make a fool of myself on your behalf." "You did not make a fool of yourself," Julian said, taking a step toward her. "You showed me more honest kindness in 5 days than I have received in 5 years from people who knew precisely who I was and valued me only for it. Do you understand what that meant to me? Do you understand what it is? To have spent 2 years certain that no one would ever again care for the man beneath the title, and then to meet a woman who cared for the man before she ever knew there was a title beneath him to find?" Iris's eyes stung, and she hated that they did, hated that even now, furious and humiliated, and unsure whether she had been the object of some elaborate private amusement, some part of her heart was still listening to him with the same helpless attention it had given him in the orangery. "You should have told me," she said, quieter now. "Whatever your reasons, and I understand them, Julian, I do, better perhaps than anyone else in this house could. You should have told me before I stood in that corridor and told my sister that people deserve civility. While you stood there, letting me believe you are the very sort of person society teaches us we need not extend it to. You let me be brave for you, and bravery costs differently when you do not know what you are risking it for." "I know," he said, and the 2 words carried more grief in them than she had heard from him in 5 days of shared sorrow over dead fathers. "I know, and I am sorry for it, more than I have words to tell you. I did not mean it as cruelty. I meant it at first as caution, and then I meant it as cowardice, because I was afraid. I am still afraid that the moment you know what I am, you will look at me the way every other woman in this house looks at me, and I could not bear to lose the other way of looking before I had to." Iris studied his face for a long moment, the grief, the fear, the raw, unguarded hope he was too tired to hide any longer, and felt her fury soften, not vanish, but settle into something more complicated, something that ached rather than burned. "I do not know how to look at you now," she admitted. "Give me time, Julian. Do not ask me to forgive the deception in the same breath you confess it. I need to understand what was true in these 5 days and what was merely a role you were playing, before I can trust my own heart in the matter." "Everything was true," he said, quietly urgently, the only lie was my name. Everything else, the reading, the grief, the orangery, the tea in the mornings, the way I have thought of nothing but you since the moment you apologized to a stranger you owed nothing. All of it was true, Iris. I have never in my life been more myself than I have been these 5 days, pretending to be less than I am. She left him standing among his books, because she did not trust herself to answer, and because the ball was 2 days away, and the world outside that library was about to demand of her a great deal more than her heart alone could easily bear. The letter arrived the following morning, and it arrived as such letters do, at the worst possible hour. Mrs. Hallowell received it at breakfast, her face draining of colour as she read, and by the time she had finished, her hand was shaking so badly that Seraphina had to take the page from her to read the rest aloud. It was from their late father's largest creditor, a Mr. Edgar Crawley, a man of considerable fortune and considerably less refinement, who had grown tired of waiting for the Hallowell debts to be repaid by ordinary means, and had proposed instead an extraordinary one. He would forgive the whole of the debt, a sum that had hung over the family like a slow drowning for 18 months, in exchange for the hand of the younger Miss Hallowell, whom he had met briefly the previous season, and found, in his own words, sensible and unlikely to give him trouble. "He means you, Iris," her mother said, folding the letter with hands that were not quite steady. "He does not want Seraphina. Seraphina is meant for greater things than a man of Crawley's sort. But he has asked for you, and I do not see that we have any choice but to accept. The debt will ruin us within the year otherwise. You must understand that this is not cruelty, Iris. It is arithmetic." Iris sat very still, the toast turning to ash in her mouth. Mr. Crawley was 52, widowed twice, and known even in circles inclined to charity as a man whose temper matched his fortune for size. She had met him precisely once, at a card party the previous winter, and recalled chiefly the way his eyes had lingered on her in a manner that made her wish for a shawl in a warm room. "Mother," she said, "I cannot." "You can, and you will," Mrs. Hallowell said, and for the first time in Iris's memory, her mother's voice cracked with something that might, in a kinder woman, have been called desperation, and in this one, Iris supposed, amounted to the same thing wearing a harder face. "Your father left us nothing but debts and daughters. Iris and I have spent 18 months trying to see us safely past both. Seraphina may yet secure the Duke, and if she does, we shall want for nothing ever again. But that is not certain, and Crawley's offer is, and I will not watch this family go under for the sake of your delicate feelings about a man's manners. And if I refuse, then you will watch your sister's dowry disappear along with any hope of hers, and this house, the only home your father left us, sold to strangers within the 12-month, and you may console yourself, in whatever lodging we can afford after, that you kept your delicate feelings intact." Mrs. Hallowell rose from the table, her composure reassembling itself even as her eyes remained wet. "You will write to Mr. Crawley today, accepting his proposal." "I am sorry for it, Iris. I am, whatever you believe of me. But I do not see another road open to us." Iris did not write the letter that day. She spent the morning instead walking the grounds in a kind of numb horror turning the impossible arithmetic of her situation over and over, and it was there, in the rose garden behind the orangery, that Julian found her. "You look as though the world has ended," he said, and then, seeing her face more closely, "Iris, what has happened?" She told him. She had not meant to, had told herself, walking out into the garden, that she would keep her own grief private. That a duke's tenderness toward a butler's version of herself was no promise of anything once the world's arithmetic reasserted itself. But his face, when he asked, held such plain, unguarded fear for her that the whole story came pouring out before she could stop it. The debt, the letter, Mr. Crawley, her mother's desperate arithmetic. Julian's expression, by the time she finished, had gone very still and very cold, the coldness she had glimpsed only once before, in the corridor when Seraphina had spoken to him as though he were nothing. "You will not marry Edgar Crawley," he said. "I do not see that I have a choice." "You do," he said. "You have me." He took her hands in his, urgent now, the careful distance he had kept between them since the library confession abandoned entirely. "Iris, I know I have given you every reason to distrust my intentions and precious few to trust them. I know 2 days is no time at all to ask you to set aside the deception I practiced upon you, however gently I meant it. But I am asking you none the less, because I cannot stand in this garden and watch you resign yourself to a man who will make you miserable for the sake of arithmetic, when the truth is that I have loved you since the moment you apologized to a stranger for a rudeness that was not even your own, and I would rather spend the rest of my life earning back the trust I damaged than spend one more day pretending I do not want to spend it with you." "Julian," Iris said, her voice breaking, "you cannot simply, I can," he said. "I am a duke, Iris. It is, on rare occasions, useful to be one. I will settle your father's debts myself this very week, and Crawley's claim upon your family will vanish along with any claim he believes he holds upon you. But I do not offer that as a bargain for your hand I would settle the debt regardless of your answer, because no woman should be sold to a man like Crawley to balance a ledger her father left behind. What I am asking, separately and with no strings attached to the other, is whether you might, in time, forgive me enough to let me court you properly, as myself, this time, with nothing hidden, and see whether what grew between us this week was strong enough to survive daylight." Iris looked at him for a long moment, the rain fresh scent of the roses around them, the grey October sky pressing low overhead, and felt something in her chest that had been clenched tight for 18 months, since her father's death, since the endless arithmetic of useful and beautiful, since a lifetime of being the daughter no one thought to ask, begin, slowly, to loosen. "I do not want to be rescued," she said finally. "I have spent my whole life being useful to people who never once asked what I wanted. If I come to you, Julian, I need it to be because I chose it, not because you settled a debt and expected gratitude in its place." "Then choose nothing yet," he said. "Let me settle the debt because it is right, and owe you no gratitude for it in return. And when Crawley's shadow is gone, and your mother's arithmetic no longer presses upon you, ask yourself again what you want, freely, with nothing owed to me either way, and give me your answer then, whatever it is." It was, Iris thought later, the single most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, precisely because it had asked for nothing in return. The debt was settled within 3 days, quietly, through channels that left Mrs. Hallowell bewildered and Mr. Crawley furious and powerless in equal measure. Iris never learned the full particulars of how Julian had managed it, only that her mother came to her one morning with the strange, humbled expression of a woman whose whole understanding of her daughter's worth had been abruptly and permanently rearranged, and said, without quite meeting Iris's eyes, that Mr. Crawley's offer had been withdrawn, and that whatever Iris chose to do now, she should know she was not required to save the family by ruining herself. It was from her mother as close to an apology as Iris had ever received, and she found she was able to accept it as one. The ball came 2 nights later, and Rothmere Hall blazed with candlelight from every window, and Julian Ashford, Duke of Rothmere, appeared at last as himself. No longer the cranky old butler in plain dark clothes, but dressed in the fine deep blue his portrait had promised, his grey eyes finding Iris across the crowded ballroom the moment she entered, as though he had been watching the door for her arrival and no one else's. Seraphina, catching sight of him properly for the first time, went very pale and then very determined, and spent the first hour of the evening attempting, with every weapon of beauty and charm at her disposal, to secure his attention, until she noticed, with growing and finally undeniable clarity, that his eyes kept finding her sister across the room instead, again and again, with a devotion too plain to be mistaken for anything but what it was. "He has been in love with you this whole week," Seraphina said to Iris later that evening, cornering her near the refreshment table with an expression that mingled envy, bewilderment, and something that might, with time, mature into genuine respect. The butler. He was the Duke the entire time, and you knew, and you said nothing, and now he cannot stop looking at you as though the rest of the room does not exist. "I did not know at first either," Iris said. "I found out only 2 days ago myself." "And you were not furious with him?" "I was," Iris admitted. "I am still deciding how much of it I mean to remain." Seraphina studied her sister for a long moment, and something in her carefully arranged face softened into an expression Iris had not seen there since they were girls. "I have called you useful my whole life," Seraphina said quietly, as though it were a smaller thing than what I was called. "I do not think I understood, until this week, that it never was." "I am sorry, Iris, truly. It was not," Iris thought, the moment she had ever expected, her beautiful sister's genuine apology, offered freely, in the middle of a ball thrown to secure a duke neither of them had entirely understood. But it settled something old and tired in her chest all the same, and she found she could smile at Seraphina without the small bitter ache that usually accompanied it. Julian found her not long after, extracting her gently from the crush of the ballroom and out onto the terrace, where the October night had turned crisp and clear and full of stars that no candlelight could rival. "You have not given me your answer," he said, and for all his title, all his fortune, all the power that had settled so easily back onto his shoulders the moment he walked into that ballroom as himself. He looked, in that moment, as uncertain and as hopeful as the man who had answered his own front door in the rain and been startled nearly speechless by an apology. Iris looked at him for a long time, the grey eyes that had watched her across breakfast tables and library shelves, the hands that had settled a debt without asking for gratitude, the voice that had told her, in an orangery full of lemon blossoms, that she was not useful but necessary, and had meant it. "I have thought about it every hour since you asked," she said. "I thought about the fact that you let me be brave on your behalf without ever needing the protection, and instead of resenting it. I find I am grateful, because it meant I got to know exactly what kind of man you are before I ever knew what kind of title you carried. I do not think I would have trusted a duke's affection so easily, Julian, I trusted a butler's, because a butler had nothing to gain from winning them. And now? Now I know the butler and the duke were the same man the entire time," Iris said, "and that the affection was never a performance, only a disguise for something that was true from the very first evening. So my answer is yes. Not because you settled a debt, and not because you are a duke, but because you are the only person in 5 years, by your own account, and the only person in my whole life, by mine, who ever thanked me for an apology, instead of simply accepting it as owed." Julian did not answer with words. He answered by taking her face gently in both hands, searching her eyes one final moment for any flicker of doubt, and finding none, kissed her there on the terrace beneath the cold bright stars, while inside the ballroom the candles burned on, and the orchestra played, and no one, not Seraphina, not Mrs. Hallowell, not the scheming Lady Pembertons of the world, yet knew that the Duke of Rothmere had just given his heart, publicly and permanently, to the useful daughter no one else had ever thought to look at twice. They were married the following spring in the small stone chapel on the Rothmere estate, with the orangeries lemon trees in full white blossom and the library shelves. Julian's wedding gift to her, a collection of Cowper's complete works bound in soft green leather, waiting for her in what would become, from that day forward, unmistakably her own room as much as his. Mrs. Hallowell wept through the entire ceremony, though whether from joy or from the particular vertigo of watching her overlooked daughter become the most powerful woman in the county, even Iris was not entirely certain, and did not think it mattered a great deal either way. Seraphina stood as her sister's attendant, and meant every word of the toast she gave afterward, that she had spent a lifetime being told she was the treasure of the family, and had needed a duke disguised as a butler to teach her that treasure was not always the loudest thing in the room. But it was what Julian said to her, quietly, on the night of their wedding, that Iris kept closest of all in the years that followed, through the birth of their first daughter, whom they named for no one but chose, together to call simply Grace, through the slow gentling of his mother's guarded heart into something like real affection for the girl her son had chosen, through every ball and every season and every ordinary rainy afternoon that followed, in which he never once let a day pass without telling her, in some small, unremarkable way, that she was seen. "I spent 2 years believing that no one would ever love the man beneath the title," he told her that night, her hand held loosely in his beneath the the same stars that had watched them on the terrace. I had made my peace with it, Iris. I had decided that coldness was simply the price a man in my position must pay for safety. And then a stranger apologized to me in the rain for a rudeness that was not even hers to apologize for, and I understood, standing in that doorway, that I had been wrong the entire time. That the world was not empty of people who could love plainly and without calculation. It was only that I had never troubled to look for one among the people who had nothing to gain by finding me. And what did you find, once you looked? Iris asked, though she already knew the answer, had known it since the orangery, since the library, since the terrace beneath the stars. I found the only thing worth being a duke for, Julian said, and drew her closer against the cold, which is a home with someone in it who would have loved me exactly the same, whether I was the master of Rothmere Hall or merely the cranky old man who answered its door. The lemon trees bloomed again the following spring, and every spring after, and it became, in time, a small private legend among the household staff, passed down through footmen and housekeepers for a generation and more, that the Duchess of Rothmere had first won her husband's heart not with beauty, nor with fortune, nor with any of the practised arts the world taught young women to wield, but with a single sincere apology offered freely to a stranger in the rain, who had turned out, against every expectation either of them had carried into that doorway, to be exactly the man she had been waiting her whole overlooked life to find.